An estate sale listed his grandfather's Anvil for $150. He crossed 3 states to get it, but what he discovered would change the entire story of his life. If you've ever felt like you were chasing a ghost or trying to reclaim a piece of yourself you thought was gone forever, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. We're going to talk about it. The email landed in my junk folder, squeezed between an offer for a credit card I'd never qualify for and a notification that my free trial for some music app was ending. The subject line was just a string of numbers and a town name. Estate sale 4882-B, Oak Haven, PA. I wouldn't have opened it. I never opened them. But Oak Haven, the name was a stone dropped into the still, quiet pond of my memory. It was the town my grandfather, Marcus, had lived in. The town I'd been taken from 6 years ago. My finger hovered over the delete icon, a reflex honed by 2 years in the system. 2 years of learning that the past was a locked room and I didn't have the key. But I clicked it open instead. The email was a garish thing, all bright yellow backgrounds and bold red text. It was a liquidation notice. Photos of floral couches, dusty china sets, and tarnished silverware scrolled by. It was the standard inventory of a life dismantled for parts. My heart was a cold, tight knot in my chest. I kept scrolling, my thumb moving mechanically. Then I saw it. Tucked at the bottom of the page, under a picture of a rusted wheelbarrow, was a photo of my grandfather's workshop. The forge was cold, the tools on the walls casting long shadows in the weak light. And there, in the center of the frame, solid and unmovable as a mountain, was his anvil. It was a beautiful old thing, a 200-pound Peter Wright with a hardened steel face and a distinctive chip on the horn that I'd traced with my finger 1,000 times as a kid. Taped to its side was a flimsy piece of paper, a price tag. The number, written in thick black marker, felt like a punch to the gut. $150. They were selling my grandfather's soul for $150. I was 18 for exactly 4 weeks. I lived in a transitional housing facility they called the Launch Pad, which was a sterile, institutional joke. It was a place with beige walls, gray carpets, and a curfew. The only thing we were launching into was the cold reality of minimum wage and the constant, humming anxiety of being utterly alone. I had $317 to my name, saved from a dishwashing job that left my hands permanently smelling of bleach and regret. 200 of that was earmarked for a security deposit on a room I hadn't found yet. The rest was for instant noodles and bus fare. $150 was more than a price. It was a wall. But looking at that picture, at that solid block of steel that held every good memory I had, I knew I had to find a way over it. That anvil wasn't just a tool. It was the only piece of my history I could still touch. It was the anchor of my life, and it was about to be sold to the highest bidder for the price of a decent pair of boots. Miss Anya, my caseworker, looked at me over the top of her glasses. Her office was the only room at the launch pad with any color, a sad-looking potted plant and a framed poster of a mountain with the word "Persevere" written under it. She was a good person, trapped in a system that ran on paperwork and pragmatism, not hope. "Leo," she said, her voice calm and measured, "Oak Haven is over 600 miles away. That's a 12-hour bus ride, one way. The sale is this Saturday. It's Thursday." "I know," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I wanted it to. I pushed my phone across her desk, the picture of the anvil glowing on the screen. "I have to go." She picked up the phone and studied the image. She knew my file. She knew Marcus was the one who had taught me to love the fire, the hammer, the hiss of hot steel and water. She knew he was the reason I spent my nights sketching knife designs in a tattered notebook instead of getting into trouble. He was the ghost in my machine. "This was your grandfather's?" she asked, her tone softening. I just nodded. Words felt too big for the moment. She sighed, a long, weary sound. "A bus ticket there and back will be close to $100. Add the cost of the anvil, and you're wiped out. What about your deposit for a room? What's the plan for getting a 200-pound anvil back here? Her questions were logical. They were the right questions, but they felt like they were in a different language. The plan wasn't about logistics. The plan was about holding on. I'll figure it out, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I can't let someone turn it into a garden ornament. It doesn't belong in some suburban yard with a gnome sitting on it. It belongs in a workshop. It belongs with me. She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. I expected a lecture, a gentle but firm refusal. I expected the system to do what it always did, tell me no. Instead, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out her wallet. She took out 3 $20 bills and laid them on the desk between us. "This is a loan," she said, her voice firm. "Not from the state, from me. For food. You call me when you get there. You call me if you get into trouble. And you call me when you're on your way back. Deal?" Tears pricked my eyes, hot and unwelcome. It was the first time in years anyone had offered me help without a form to fill out. "Deal," I whispered. The bus station was a purgatory of stale coffee and desperation. I bought my ticket, the cost making a sickening dent in my savings. The bus hissed and groaned, pulling away from the curb and into the pre-dawn darkness. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching the city lights smear and then vanish, replaced by the endless, monotonous dark of the highway. 12 hours. For 12 hours, I was suspended between the life I was trying to escape and a past I was trying to reclaim. The bus was filled with ghosts. People heading toward something or running from something, their faces illuminated in brief, ghostly flashes by the lights of passing cars. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the good things. I remembered the smell of my grandfather's workshop, a mix of coal smoke, hot metal, and quenching oil. I remembered the rhythmic, deafening clang of his hammer on steel, a sound that was more like a heartbeat than noise. He was a mountain of a man, with hands calloused and scarred from a lifetime of wrestling with fire. He would let me stand beside him, my small hands gripping a smaller hammer, and he'd guide my strikes. "Not with your arm, Leo," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "With your whole body, let the hammer do the work, you're just guiding it home." He taught me how to read the color of the steel, the cherry red of forging temperature, the straw yellow of a good temper. He taught me that to make something strong, you had to heat it, beat it, and then cool it with purpose. He was teaching me about steel, but he was also teaching me about life. Then came the other memories, the ones that crowded the edges of the good ones. The hushed, angry phone calls he'd take late at night, the worry that settled into the lines around his eyes, the way he started looking over his shoulder. I was 12, and I didn't understand the words. Words like foreclosure, debt, leverage. I just understood the feeling, the slow creeping cold that had nothing to do with the weather. And then, one day, a car pulled up, a woman with a tired smile and a clipboard came to the door, and my world ended. They said he couldn't take care of me anymore. They said it was for my own good. He didn't fight them. He just stood on the porch, his big frame looking stooped and old, and watched the car drive away. He didn't even wave. For 6 years, that was the image that haunted me, his stillness, his silence, his abandonment. I hated him for it, and I loved him for it, and the two feelings were so tangled up, I couldn't tell them apart anymore. The bus rocked gently, a cradle of strangers, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on the window. I wasn't just going to buy an anvil, I was going to find an answer. The bus pulled into Oakhaven just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The town was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just gotten bigger. The main street was a quiet stretch of brick storefronts, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a gas station. It felt like a place the world had forgotten. The air was different here, cleaner, colder, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was the smell of my childhood. I didn't have a plan for where to stay. My meager budget screamed for me to sleep on a park bench, but the biting autumn wind had other ideas. I found a small, run-down motel at the edge of town called the Sleepy Pine. The man at the counter had a face like a road map of poor decisions. He took my $40 without a word and slid a key attached to a large plastic pine tree across the counter. The room was exactly what you'd expect for $40. The bedspread was a questionable shade of brown, the air was thick with the ghost of 1,000 cigarettes, and the TV had a coat hanger for an antenna. But it was a room. It had a lock. It was mine for the night. I dropped my backpack on the floor and lay on the bed, the springs groaning in protest. I had made it. Step 1 was complete. But a new kind of anxiety began to creep in. What if the Anvil was already sold? What if someone had bought it online before the sale even officially started? The estate sale was from 9 to 4. I had to be the first one there. I set the alarm on my phone for 6 a.m., but I knew I wouldn't sleep. The ghosts were too loud in Oakhaven. I was outside my grandfather's house at 7:30 the next morning. The sun was still a weak promise behind the thick gray clouds. The property was on a back road, surrounded by dense woods. The house itself was a simple, 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling like a sunburn. It looked smaller, sadder than I remembered. A large, professionally printed sign was staked in the front yard. "Estate sale today. Everything must go." The words felt like a violation. A woman with a clipboard and a tight, joyless ponytail was setting up a cash box on a card table on the porch. She gave me a suspicious look. "We don't open till 9, she said, her voice sharp. "I know. I'll wait," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I couldn't bring myself to tell her this was my grandfather's house. To her, it was just inventory. To me, it was a crime scene. I walked around the side of the house, my feet crunching on the gravel driveway. My destination was the workshop, a large, barn-like structure set back from the house. The big rolling door was open, and the cold morning air spilled out. I stepped inside, and my breath caught in my throat. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, a shroud over a life's work. Hammers, tongs, and chisels hung in their neat rows on the walls, each with a small white price tag dangling from it. Bags of coal were stacked by the forge, each marked with a price. They had monetized every piece of him. And there, in the center of it all, was the anvil. It was just as I remembered, solid and eternal. The orange tag, $150, was an insult. I walked over to it and placed my hand on its cold steel face. It was like touching an old friend. I could feel the faintest vibrations of 1,000 hammer blows, a history of creation and sweat and fire embedded in the metal itself. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I could almost hear the roar of the forge and the ringing of the hammer. For a second, he was there with me. I spent the next hour walking through the workshop, a ghost in my own past. I saw the spot where he'd taught me to weld, the scorch marks still on the workbench. I saw the bucket of railroad spikes he'd let me practice on, turning them into clumsy, misshapen knives. Every object held a memory, and every price tag felt like a fresh wound. I noticed things the estate sale people had missed or hadn't cared about. The specific way he organized his tongs, from smallest to largest. The worn spot on the wooden floor where he always stood, a shallow depression carved by years of work. I ran my hand along the rough-hewn wooden wall near the forge, my fingers tracing the grain. And then I felt it. A single nail, driven halfway in a spot that made no sense. It wasn't holding anything up. It was just there. My grandfather was a meticulous man. Nothing in his shop was without purpose. I remembered him tapping that same nail one afternoon, telling me, "Everything has its place, Leo, and every place has its reason." At the time, I thought he was just talking about putting tools away. Now, I wasn't so sure. I tried to pull the nail out, but it was stuck fast. I looked closer. It wasn't a nail. It was a pin, designed to look like a nail. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was a secret. This was something just for me. But I couldn't do anything about it now, with the ponytailed woman occasionally glancing in my direction. First, I had to secure the anvil. At 9 o'clock sharp, a few cars pulled into the driveway. A handful of people, mostly older couples looking for antique furniture, began to wander through the house. I stayed in the workshop, a silent guardian. A man in a flannel shirt and a trucker hat walked in, looked around, and his eyes landed on the anvil. He walked over to it, ran his hand over the horn, and grunted in appreciation. $150. Not a bad price for a good Peter Wright, he said to no one in particular. He looked at me. You thinking about buying it, kid? I am, I said, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. I stood a little closer to it, as if my proximity could claim it. He chuckled. Good luck getting it home. Thing's gotta be 200 pounds. He gave it one last pat and then wandered off, more interested in a set of old wrenches. I didn't breathe again until he was gone. I walked out to the porch, my hands shaking. I handed the woman with the ponytail $150 from my dwindling cash pile. I'll take the anvil, I said. She barely looked up from her sales ledger. Fine, it's marked as sold. You have until 4 o'clock to get it off the property. It's your responsibility to move it. I had just spent more than half my money on a 200-pound block of steel that I had no way to move, in a town where I knew no one, 600 miles from the closest thing I had to a home. But as I walked back into the workshop and saw the "sold" sign she'd slapped on its side, a fierce, protective joy washed over me. It was mine. Whatever happened next, it was mine. I spent the next few hours figuring out the problem of physics. I found an old hand truck in the corner of the workshop, its tires flat. I used a rusty air pump to fill them, the rubber groaning in protest. Wrestling the anvil onto the hand truck was a battle of leverage and sheer willpower. I was sweating and shaking by the time it was balanced. The 2-mile walk back to the Sleepy Pine Motel was the longest 2 miles of my life. The hand truck's wheels wobbled, the anvil shifted precariously with every crack in the sidewalk, and every person who passed me stared. I probably looked insane, a skinny kid in a hoodie, wrestling a massive anvil down a country road. I didn't care. Each step was a victory. I somehow managed to get it into my motel room, half rolling, half dragging it over the threshold, leaving a deep gouge in the cheap linoleum. There it sat, in the middle of the room, looking ancient and powerful, and completely out of place next to the flimsy particle board furniture. It was real. I had done it. I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but triumphant. Now for the second part of my plan. I had to get back to the workshop before the sale ended at 4. I had to see what that strange pin in the wall was hiding. I rested for an hour, my mind racing, and then I walked back, the journey feeling much shorter without my 200-pound companion. The crowd had thinned. The woman on the porch gave me a nod, assuming I was coming back for another load. I slipped back into the workshop. It was emptier now, picked over. The tools were gone from the walls, leaving clean outlines in the dust. It felt even more like a tomb. I went straight to the wall and examined the pin again. With the shop quieter, I could be more deliberate. I tried to twist it. It didn't budge. I pushed it. Nothing. I pulled. Nothing. I thought back to my grandfather's words. Everything has its place, and every place has its reason. He was a blacksmith. He thought in terms of force and leverage. I looked around. On the workbench was a single hammer they hadn't sold, probably because the head was loose. I picked it up. It felt familiar in my hand. I stood in front of the pin. It looked like a nail. You hit a nail. I took a breath and tapped the head of the pin with the hammer. Not hard, just a solid tap. There was a soft, satisfying click. The section of the wall around the pin, a piece of wood about a foot square, loosened. It wasn't a door. It was a cleverly disguised panel. My hands were trembling as I pried it open. Behind it was a small, dark cavity, and inside that cavity was a heavy, steel box, the kind used for important documents. It was locked. Of course it was locked. But tucked into the handle of the box was a small, folded piece of paper. My name was written on the outside in my grandfather's familiar, blocky handwriting. Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the answer. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a combination. 3 numbers. I looked at the box. It had a simple combination dial. My mind raced. What about the key? A box this solid would have a keyhole, too. I felt around in the dark cavity. My fingers brushed against something cold and small. A key, tied with a piece of twine to a hook inside the space. He had left me everything I needed. I pulled the box out. It was heavy, dense with secrets. I couldn't open it here. I had to get it back to the motel. I tucked the box under my jacket, replaced the wooden panel, and tapped the pin. With another click, it locked back into place, looking like nothing more than an old nail. I walked out of the workshop without looking back, the cold weight of the box pressed against my chest. Back in the motel room, the anvil stood like a silent witness. I placed the steel box on the floor beside it. For a moment, I just stared at it. This box held the truth. The truth about the last 6 years of my life. The truth about why the man who taught me everything I knew about strength had simply let me go. I was terrified of what I would find inside. What if the truth was worse than the story I'd told myself? What if he really hadn't wanted me? But not knowing was its own kind of prison. I had to open it. I took a deep breath, my fingers fumbling with the combination dial. I spun the numbers he had written down. The tumblers fell into place with a series of soft clicks. Then I inserted the key. It turned smoothly, and the latch on the box sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside there were 2 things. The first was a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with a rubber band. They were all addressed to me. The second was a bundle of cash, wrapped in wax paper. I counted it. It was $5,000. Enough for a security deposit. Enough for a new start. Enough to run away and never look back. But the money was secondary. My eyes were fixed on the letters. I picked up the stack. The top envelope was simply labeled, Number 1, read me first. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear it open. The letter inside was several pages long, filled with my grandfather's strong, slightly slanted script. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed and began to read. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, then it means 2 things. First, that I am gone. And second, that you were clever enough to find your way back here. I always knew you were. I am so sorry, my boy, for everything. The words blurred through my tears. I had to stop and wipe my eyes before I could continue. I need you to understand, he wrote. I never wanted you to go. Sending you away was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my life in 2. But I had no choice. I was in trouble, Leo, deep trouble. He went on to explain. He'd taken out a loan against the property years ago to pay for my grandmother's medical bills. The loan was from a company that seemed legitimate at first, but they were predators. The interest rates were criminal, the terms impossible. After she passed, he fell behind. The company, a developer called Northgate Holdings, didn't just want their money back. They wanted the land. His property, and the properties around it, were sitting on a prime spot for a new suburban development. They started pressuring him, threatening him. At first, it was just letters and phone calls. Then, men started showing up at the workshop. They made it clear that if he didn't sign over the deed, things would get ugly. They saw you, Leo, he wrote. They saw you in the workshop with me. One of them said to me, "That's a fine boy you've got there. Be a shame if something happened to him. A workshop can be a dangerous place." And in that moment, I knew I had lost. I could fight for the land. I could fight for myself. But I couldn't fight for both of us. I couldn't risk you. So I made a deal with the devil. I called social services myself. I told them I was an unfit guardian. I told them I had a drinking problem, that I couldn't cope. Every word was a lie, and every lie felt like swallowing broken glass. But it was the only way to make you disappear from their radar, to make you safe. They took you, and it was a clean break. Northgate thought they had won. They thought that with you gone, I would just roll over and sign. But I didn't. My whole body went cold. The story I had carried for 6 years, the heavy cloak of abandonment, was a lie. It wasn't abandonment. It was a shield. He hadn't pushed me away. He had placed me behind him. I put the letter down, my chest aching with a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. I cried. I cried for the 12-year-old boy in the back of that car, watching his whole world shrink in the rearview mirror. I cried for the man who had to tear out his own heart to save his grandson. I cried for the 6 years of anger and resentment I had carried, a weight that had shaped the person I had become. It was all built on a lie, a necessary, terrible, beautiful lie. After a long time, I picked up the letter and kept reading. He explained that he'd spent the last 6 years fighting them in his own way. He couldn't win in court. They had better lawyers and deeper pockets. So he started gathering evidence. He recorded phone calls. He made copies of their fraudulent loan documents. He talked to other people in the area they had cheated. He had built a case against them, piece by piece. All of it, he wrote, was in the other letters in the box. The $5,000 was every last cent he had managed to save. It was for me. Here's the choice I am leaving you, Leo, the letter concluded. It's not a fair choice, but it's the only one I can give. You can take this money and the Anvil, and you can go. Build a new life for yourself. Forget Oakhaven. Forget Northgate. Forget all of this. Be safe. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. Or, you can stay. You can use the evidence in this box. You can fight them. They won't be expecting it. They think I'm just a dead old man whose property is finally theirs. They don't know about you. The fight will be hard. You might not win. But this land, this workshop, it's your birthright. It's in your blood. I didn't save it for myself. I saved it for you. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I love you more than words can say. I have been with you every single day. Your grandfather, Marcus. I let the letter fall into my lap. The room was silent, save for the hum of the mini-fridge and the frantic beating of my own heart. A choice. He had left me a choice. Run or fight. Freedom or legacy. The easy wrong or the harder right. For 6 years, I had been a passenger in my own life, moved from one place to another by forces I couldn't control. The system decided where I slept, what I ate, what my future would look like. I had learned to be small, to be quiet, to expect nothing. But Marcus hadn't raised me to be small. He had raised me in front of a forge, a place of fire and force and transformation. He had taught me to take something raw and useless, and with heat and pressure and will, turn it into something strong and beautiful and purposeful. I looked at the anvil. It wasn't just a tool, it was a foundation. It was a symbol of everything he had been, everything he had taught me. To take the money and run would be to spit on his grave. It would be to say that his sacrifice, his 6 years of lonely fighting, meant nothing. It would be to let them win. And I couldn't do that. The anger I had carried for him for 6 years wasn't gone. It had just been redirected. It was now a clean, white-hot flame pointed directly at Northgate Holdings. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. I was 18 years old, with a few $100s to my name, up against a powerful corporation. The odds were impossible. But my grandfather had believed in me. He had trusted me to be clever enough to find the box and strong enough to make the right choice. I had to prove him right. My decision wasn't even a decision. It was a recognition of who I was. I was my grandfather's grandson. I was a blacksmith, and I was going to fight. The first call I made was to Ms. Anya. It was late, but I knew she'd be awake. I told her everything. I read her parts of the first letter, my voice cracking with emotion. I told her about the evidence, about Northgate, about the choice. I expected her to be pragmatic, to tell me to take the money and run, to warn me about the dangers. But she didn't. She was silent for a long moment when I finished. "Leo," she said finally, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man." "What do I do, Ms. Anya?" I asked, the question feeling impossibly heavy. "You do what you think is right," she said simply, "and you let me help. This is bigger than case management now. I know someone, a lawyer who works with a legal aid society. He specializes in predatory lending and corporate fraud. He's a bulldog. Let me call him. You stay put. Don't talk to anyone from Northgate. Don't do anything until we have a plan." For the second time in 3 days, her support felt like a lifeline. I wasn't entirely alone in this. The next morning, I used a chunk of the $5,000 to rent the motel room for another week. Then I went to the town hall. I found the county records office, a small, dusty room that smelled of old paper. I asked the clerk for the file on my grandfather's property. She looked at me, a young kid in a hoodie, with suspicion. But when I gave her the address and Marcus's full name, she relented. The file showed the property was in the final stages of foreclosure, scheduled for public auction in less than 30 days. Northgate Holdings was the primary lien holder. But it wasn't theirs yet. There was still a window. A small one, but it was there. I made copies of everything. Information was ammunition. The rest of the day, I sat in the motel room and read the other letters. Each one was a piece of the puzzle. One contained detailed notes of every conversation he'd had with Northgate's representatives, with dates, times, and direct quotes. Another had the original loan documents, with Marcus's annotations in the margins, pointing out the deceptive clauses and hidden fees. A third letter was the most powerful. It was a collection of stories from 3 other families in the Oak Haven area who had lost their land to Northgate in the exact same way. They had been isolated, intimidated, and forced out. My grandfather had documented it all. He had built a class action lawsuit in a box. He had given me a sword. The lawyer Miss Anya connected me with, a man named Ben Carter, called that afternoon. His voice was tired but sharp, a voice that had spent years fighting losing battles and had won just enough of them to keep going. I told him the whole story. He listened patiently, only interrupting to ask clarifying questions. When I was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Thorne," he said, and the use of the formal address sent a strange jolt through me. "Your grandfather has handed you a grenade. Northgate has a reputation. They're bullies. But bullies hate a paper trail, and it sounds like you're sitting on a mountain of it. Can you scan and email me everything, every letter, every document?" I spent the next 2 days at the local library, using their public scanner to digitize every single page my grandfather had left me. I sent it all to Ben. The waiting was excruciating. I cleaned the Anvil. I used a wire brush and oil, carefully removing the surface rust, revealing the dark, hardened steel beneath. I cleaned the chip on the horn, the maker's mark, the slight sway in the face from a century of work. Cleaning it felt like an act of devotion. It focused me. It connected me to him. On the 3rd day, Ben called back. "Okay, Leo," he said, and the weariness in his voice had been replaced by a spark of something else. Excitement. "This is good. This is very good. Their loan contract is predatory under state law. The harassment your grandfather documented is actionable. And the stories from the other families, that establishes a pattern of racketeering. They never thought anyone would connect the dots. This isn't just about saving your property anymore. This could be a real problem for them." He laid out the plan. First, we'd file for an emergency injunction to halt the foreclosure auction, using my grandfather's evidence as cause. Second, we'd file a lawsuit against Northgate on behalf of my grandfather's estate, which was now my estate, for fraud, harassment, and predatory lending. Third, He would reach out to the other families my grandfather had identified. It wasn't a guarantee. It was the first shot in what would be a long, ugly war. But it was a shot. "This will take money, Leo," Ben warned. "More than what you have. The injunction will cost a few thousand in legal fees just to file." I looked at the anvil. Then I looked at the remaining cash on the motel dresser. "I have the anvil," I said, an idea forming. It was a crazy idea. "What?" "My grandfather was a blacksmith. I'm a bladesmith. That's what I do. I make knives. I can work. I can sell them. I can fund this myself." It was a bold, almost ludicrous statement. I had no workshop, no tools besides the anvil, and no customers. But saying it out loud made it feel real. I wasn't just the victim in this story anymore. I was a participant. The next day, I used the last of the cash from Ms. Anya and some of my grandfather's money to buy a bus ticket back home. I couldn't afford to move the anvil yet. I paid the motel owner $200 to store it in his back shed, a dusty space filled with broken lawnmowers and old tires. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he took the money. Leaving it behind felt like leaving a part of myself, but I knew I'd be back for it. This wasn't goodbye. The 12-hour ride back was different. I wasn't running from a past I didn't understand. I was heading toward a future I had chosen. When I got back to the launch pad, I gave Miss Anya the $60 she had loaned me. I told her the plan. She just nodded, a small, proud smile on her face. I used the money I had left to buy a few essential tools, a portable gas forge, a good hammer, some steel. I set up a makeshift workshop in the backyard of the transitional house, a clear violation of about a dozen rules. But for the first time, I didn't care about the rules. I had a purpose. I started forging. I made simple, sturdy knives, the kind a hunter or a craftsman would use. I poured all of my anger, my grief, and my hope into the steel. Each hammer blow on the small piece of railroad track I was using as a makeshift anvil was a blow against Northgate. Each finished blade was a step closer to Oak Haven. I sold them online, on forums for knife enthusiasts. The first one sold for $75. It felt like $1 million. I sent every dollar I made to Ben Carter for the legal fund. The injunction was granted. The auction was halted. It was a small victory, but it was everything. Northgate's lawyers responded with a blizzard of motions and threats, trying to bury us in paperwork, trying to bleed me dry. But they didn't know what they were up against. They were up against a ghost. They were up against Marcus Thorne's grandson. The fight is still going on. It's been a year. I'm not in the launch pad anymore. I rent a small garage space where I have a proper workshop now. The legal battle is slow, a grinding war of attrition. But we're winning. 2 of the other families have joined the lawsuit. The local paper in Oak Haven wrote an article about it. Northgate is feeling the heat. Last month, I drove a rented truck across 3 states and went back to Oak Haven. I went to the Sleepy Pine Motel, and the owner, who remembered me, helped me load the anvil into the back. Driving it back to my new workshop, I felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. It sits in the center of my shop now, the heart of the entire operation. It's not just a piece of steel, it's a promise. It's a monument to a father's love disguised as abandonment. It's a reminder of what I'm fighting for. I look at it every day before I start working. I see the chip on the horn, and I remember being a small boy, full of wonder. I see the hardened steel face, and I remember the lessons about strength and pressure and purpose. My grandfather didn't leave me a piece of property. He didn't leave me a legal battle or a box of secrets. He left me a legacy. A home isn't always a place with 4 walls and a roof. Sometimes it's a history. Sometimes it's a purpose. Sometimes it's a choice to stand and fight for the ground beneath your feet, even if you're the only one standing there. He taught me how to shape steel, but in the end, he taught me how to shape my own life. Home isn't always a place you're given. Sometimes it's a place you have to build, or a place you have to fight for. It's about where you decide to make your stand. For me, that stand started with a $150 anvil and a truth I had to cross 3 states to find. What does home mean to you? Has there ever been a place or a person that you had to fight to hold on to? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, because this community we're building here is for people who understand that the most valuable things in life are the ones with the deepest stories. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with that part of you that knows about struggle and second chances, please subscribe. Let's keep building this place together. You're not alone in your fight.
So I did kind of mess up with this and the other one. Good night, bedtime. All right, sounds good, Seamus. Thanks so much for hanging out. Appreciate it. Okay, we do need a couple. It's a creepy, cozy looking sim where you befriend local wildlife. Strange house +4 to explore. Oh, interesting. Middle. Okay, we'll see how many we need of those. I'm back. Hi, On. Good to see you. Okay. Let's see. I don't like that. Thanks for the water reminder, Emma. Appreciate it. Okay. Are you an ASMR artist too? I'm not on. Everybody talks about my voice being ASMR, but uh, I just regular sound like this. Actually, low-key kind of feel a little bad because like I literally have no interaction whatsoever with the ASMR community. Oh yeah, should I like start tapping the mic? Okay. You should. Here's the thing. Maybe, but I also don't have that kind of time. I was like, between this, my regular real job, and then also just like my other activities like rock climbing and like yoga, I do not have time to do anything else. And being Batman, whisper at us. Okay. And slurping from the mug bowl. I'm dying. Tickling the microphone with the makeup brush. Oh my god.